So, are there any questions? Yes. Yes.
What is the actual practical application of your work on imaginary studies? Isn't it just another example of a researcher trying to sound clever? I find myself asking, so what?
Well, it's not really something that we really... I'm not quite sure how to answer. Anybody else? Has anybody else got anything? Yeah, you.
Dr. North, I have to say I find your research disturbingly subversive. Doesn't what you're suggesting undermine the entire reason that we come to conferences such as this? Aren't you endangering all of our jobs by encouraging civilians to peek behind the curtain?
I can't answer that at the moment. I'm sorry. I just can't answer it. In a world where the research questions are many but grant money is hard to find, what if you could get the results of a study without ever having to actually conduct it? In a world where alternate possibilities are left to play out unresolved, I propose imaginary studies. To evaluate a real-life artefact, the Umamimi robotic horses, which are 2 microservo motors, each moving an independent ear, the user making head inclinations and software responding to accelerometer changes with predefined and fully customizable ear movements when the accelerometer is still and level, random default ear flicks and movements are cued. So the physical device provides a backdrop for my experiences, my self-reflections, their critique, the quantitative ideas behind hard science, and at the same time my own cognitive bias and rigid attachment to a viewpoint and presumptions concerning the anticipated results from the study are all taken into account. So what does the fiction that I create for imaginary studies say about my own story and the robotic horse's broader societal and cultural meanings? In a world where the research questions are many, but grant money is I just lost. This is about evaluating an artefact, the robotic horses that move with the servers and it's like a smartphone with its accelerometer doing things. And sorry, bear with me, I knew where I was a minute ago, but I've just slightly lost my place. And it's all about me and my cognitive ideas and how it changes things, and about the physical robotic courses, which I've already said about. Why autoethnography, science fiction and imaginary studies? Well, first of all, with autoethnography, Holman Jones et al. In the Handbook of Autoethnography in 2015 says, quote, it's about the use of personal experience to explore cultural practices. Quantitative studies are quite good at describing overarching facets of things, but they're less adept at accounting for or describing the particular, the micro, and the situated elements of our lives. It's all about telling stories with autoethnography, and that relates very much to the idea of imaginary studies. It adds the author's personal voice, how to do my life story, my broader cultural, societal and political experiences relating back to my academic work. Why science fiction? Well, writing fictional autoethnographies on the design, use and perception of technology is totally appropriate to use science fiction. I'm inspired by David Kirby's diegetic prototypes from the worlds of design fiction, where diegetic is the narrative attribute, a fictional place revealed through narrative made to be self-explanatory of the universes that they originated in. And such fictional prototypes exist within a future context which their operation is suited and often patently obvious. They readily provide effective entry points into complex and potentially controversial socio-technological themes, such as the application of human technologies to disabled non-human animals. And why imaginary studies? The challenge is to imagine doing the quantitative study without actually doing it, and then to speculate about the results. As Vaihinga said in his ideas about as if in the 1920s, quote, very often we can reasonably proceed as if what we know to be false is true because it's useful for some purpose to do so. Okay, so imaginary studies, science fiction and autoethnography, why do they come together? I'd like to say no, but I'm not quite sure right at this moment. autoethnography, it's about writing, design, or no, that's the science fiction bit. It's so quantitative studies, good at describing the overarching facets of things, and it's all about adding the author's personal voice in and things. And hang on, what's the one? There's one I haven't mentioned there, isn't there? Which is the one I haven't mentioned. I did the science fiction, I did the autoethnography and imaginary studies, which... So thinking about the study design, all study needs a research question, and mine is, do the attentional cues of a video recorded human wearing user controllable animatronic robotic ears influence location specific feeding decisions in horses? The design for my imaginary study is based on a real study conducted and published by equine science researchers. I've made slight revisions to the original study in order to reflect my use of the robotic horse ears. Horse participants are released by human handlers and allowed to choose, if they wish, from one of two buckets where only one contains food. They're guided towards the correct bucket with the food by video clips on a large screen of a human wearing the robotic horse ears, with the ears providing an attentional cue by flicking one ear in the direction of the correct bucket. Is the horse influenced by the video of the attentional cue? So somehow I designed the study for this, and I had a research question, but I haven't got it right at the moment. It's something about buckets of food and ears flicking in the dark. I've gone completely blank on this, I'm really sorry. And it's based on a real study, real horsey people did it, and there were people there and leading the horses backwards and forwards and things, and it's hugely significant, and it's do the flicky ears, robotic flicky ears actually managed to make the horse look at the bucket. So now we're moving on to study results and analysis. My result is a percentage of congruent choices, which are just potential data points in a continuum of speculative outcomes determined by factors including my own confidence. This is an imaginary study superposition of result states, a concept inspired by quantum physics, only collapsing into a single result state when and only if the real quantitative study is actually conducted. When confident about my imaginary study, the superposition collapses into a single result state, suggesting that horses are sensitive to the attentional states of a human wearing robotic horse ears, and that this influenced their decision concerning where to feed. Analysis of results can be considered also as an imaginary study superposition of analytical states. So age, sex, testing sensor, which is where the horse lives, the stimuli direction, and a selection of imaginary parameters including the horse's star sign, coat colour, favourite boy band, etc., were fictionally entered as predictors in a logistic regression with feeding choice as the response variable. So an imaginary regression is similar to attempting to simulate all the possible results of the regression occurring simultaneously, and any parameter, singly or in combination, could be making a significant contribution to the observed results. And now at this point in the presentation, before you all rush off and leave, which I can see some of you are already doing, the results and the analysis of the study, and my results, and it was about congruent choices, and they're all just potential data points all floating around in the space-time continuum. No superposition. I'm supposed to talk about imaginary study superposition, and we had all these other factors and we put them all in, and any parameter could be making a contribution or something. I'm sure people I work with would tell me if that was right or not, but I'm not quite sure at the moment. But anyway, it seemed to go quite well. In conclusion, I'd like to say that imaginary studies allow us to fully explore both the problem and solution spaces. It allows the artifact developer to rehearse the process of evaluation. Imaginary studies provides a way to consider the different outcomes that might emerge from a study. might not change how you actually choose to evaluate your technology, but you'll be more informed about the currents that are directing your research choices. What if you could get the results of a study without ever having to actually conduct it? Just imagine. So, in conclusion, we did some things, some of them went well, I'll speak up, some of them went well, and some of them didn't go as well as others did, and imaginary studies is great, and I think we're going to try and do some more of it if we possibly can, and we've got okay. So, are there any questions? Yes.
What is the actual practical application of your work on imaginary studies? Isn't it just another example of a researcher trying to sound clever? I find myself asking, so what?
There are practical applications, we believe, for imaginary studies. It allows people without perhaps the funding budgets to think about how the evaluation and the outcome of their research might actually play out, and to actually rehearse how an experiment might proceed, how the evaluation might proceed. This is not necessarily a replacement for actually doing it, but it might make you think about whether it's worth doing it in the future. And I think that's important, that in terms of trying to sound clever, the language that I'm selecting to use, try to be as appropriate as possible. But obviously when we're dealing with something as complex as looking at the societal and cultural aspects themselves of the way we think about a problem, it's obvious that we're going to have to use some level of analysis and some level of critique that will involve language of some complexity. So, is there another one?
Dr. North, I have to say I find your research disturbingly subversive. Doesn't what you're suggesting undermine the entire reason that we come to conferences such as this? Aren't you endangering all of our jobs by encouraging civilians to peek behind the curtain?
Well, I'm certainly not trying to talk us all out of a job. I don't personally have a problem with the civilians peeping behind the curtain. I think it's good that we're open, that we provide open access to what we do. And I think it's healthy to have this kind of reflection on what we're doing. And rather than going through the processes of doing the research, publishing, going to conferences without critiquing our own behaviour and the approach of academia, there's no harm in picking this apart and looking at it so that we can find out perhaps ways to do this better. But thanks for the question. So I've got the email. Dear Steve, congratulations, your paper, Imaginary Studies, blah, 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 has been accepted. Yay! To this year's alt.chi programme. Space is always tight, 23% acceptance rate. We received many, many excellent papers. We agreed your paper deserves a spot at alt.chi 2019. Oh, that's great. Now, how am I going to present it? Bear with me, because it sounds kind of out there, but I'm leaning towards, and I'm just flying a kite here, some kind of non-linear timeline overall with multi-stranded parallel developments with looping and replays on episodes and vignettes with a few selected time-separated alternate versions. I don't know, maybe the questions and answer session at the end of the presentations is used as a fractured frame portmanteau, like an open bag containing the other episodes within two alternate versions of the questions, or something similar. What do you think? I hope you like it. Is this work ready for the public? Will they recognise the sheer genius or discover the Empress completely without clothes? Of course, as I had to explain to my parents at age 1, I've always suffered from imposter syndrome, also known as imposter phenomenon, imposterism, fraud syndrome, or the imposter experience, a psychological pattern in which an individual doubts his or her accomplishments and has a persistent internalized fear of being exposed as a fraud. But then again, I may have just made the theoretical discovery of the century. Very often we can reasonably perceive as if what we know to be false is true because it's useful for some purpose to do so. Very often we can reasonably perceive as if what we know to be false is true because it's useful for some purpose to do so. Very often we can reasonably perceive as if what we know to be false is true because it's useful for some purpose to do so. but very often we can reasonably perceive as if, well, we know to be false and true because it's useful for some purpose to do so.